BizBlend podcast listeners, where real conversations meet real business. I'm your host Sana, and today we are cutting through the noise of hustle culture and instant success stories. Joining me is Brad Henderson. He's a leadership coach, CEO, and author of The Consistency Effect: How to Turn Reliable Actions into Remarkable Success. Let me share a bit about Brad with all of you listeners. With over 45 years of leading companies across industry like real estate, telecom, technology, and manufacturing, Brad has lived the hard decisions, the turnarounds, and the quiet leadership that builds legacies. And today, on this episode of BizBlend, we'll be diving into what he calls the anti Grand Slam playbook. It's a practical, disciplined approach that proves it's not the home runs, but the consistent singles and doubles that create long term success. So, if you are tired of the burnout cycle and you are looking for a sustainable path to real achievement, I am absolutely sure this episode is for you. So, with that, Brad, welcome to the show, and I am extremely honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction, Santa, and it's my pleasure to be on your show.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Um, to begin with, let's start right at the foundation. You challenge the popular narrative of hustle hard and hit it big. Why do you believe this obsession with grand slams has become so, to say, dangerous for today's leaders and entrepreneurs?
I think um, I think it's amplified by the media, which, of course, every day becomes bigger and faster and more profound in our working lives, and so people are accustomed to reading headlines or reading stories in their social media about overnight
Mm.
success, billionaires being created seemingly on an hourly basis, and people feel that that's how they need to act and how they need to have and shape their goals. And this is what is causing a tremendous amount of stress in leadership because for most of us, and I'll include myself in that, I wasn't the grand slam home run hitter. I was someone who built a career over 45 years through consistent and reliable actions that over time turned into remarkable results.
Hmm. You know what? I absolutely agree with you, Brad. I absolutely agree with you. And um, it can be sometimes hard to justify you're not progressing. I can't see any output immediately here. But it's those consistent small hits, those singles and doubles that take you to a much more sustainable something, a win that is kind of a legacy for others to follow. So I'm absolutely at the same place where you are. So Brad, in the consistency effect, you talk about singles and doubles, of course, being more sustainable. But how do we balance this mindset with the very real pressure to show exponential growth to investors, boards, and teams?
And it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question, Santa. And I think the real part that is important for leaders is to discover and to recognize that this is putting an inordinate amount of pressure on them. The other thing is to recognize that consistency suffers what I would consider to be a marketing problem. In other words, if I say to somebody, the real key here is to just be consistent, they think that's too simple. That's too ordinary. That's something that every leader who's worth their salt should know already. But the real
Mm.
trick, the real magic, if you like, is that consistency is a concept that is easy to understand and easy to say, but it is very, very difficult to execute. And so what I try to explain and to explore in the book is this whole notion that consistency doesn't get the attention that it deserves, which is one of the major reasons why it's so misunderstood and so mispracticed or underpracticed, if you like, in the real world.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. I once again, I hear this from my own network as well. I mean, I have worked with startups, and it's always a culture that you have to be like constantly delivering and very tight in terms of delivering outputs. And how do you coach leaders to stand firm under this kind of pressure? I mean, is it really possible to hit that balance, or is it something that we have to be openly prioritizing and be very clear that yes, I'm someone who is more about consistency and small steps but effective steps that will lead to sustainable effective outputs.
Yeah, I think there's a popular misconception that consistency doesn't equal effectiveness, and that consistency doesn't require an inordinate amount of action at any given time, but rather it tries to look at business success through the lens of singles and doubles as opposed to home runs. I think every business person who approaches a business or a project or any particular initiative isn't shooting for mediocrity. And singles and doubles don't mean that you're accepting mediocrity. They mean that you're prioritizing actions and positive steps towards your goal, opposed to things that are appear to be simple overnight successes that at the end of the day aren't what they appear to be. And one of the other things that the book explores is the fact that why is consistency so difficult for us to achieve on a regular basis? And it turns out that there are psychological barriers to consistency, there are cultural barriers to consistency, and there are also structural barriers to consistency. And so we go through each of those and try to help business leaders understand what those barriers are and how they can have the mindset to overcome those barriers. And in some cases, put in systems that allow them to be more consistent and not have to rely on sheer willpower or sheer determination.
Hmm. That is something to definitely introspect about. And Brad, you have personally led organizations through um, turnarounds, international expansions, and also tough boardrooms. And um, now it's becoming more and more relevant to address this. So can you share any real example, like a success story or maybe a case study where consistent action outperformed what others thought was only possible with a huge risk or a major big bet?
Yeah, I will use my own career as one example, and that is that uh, early on in my career, I was involved with some corporate politics, which involved me being fired. And that was a cataclysmic realization that I needed to view my career not as an individual within one company, but as really someone who had a set of skills and capabilities that could be applied across different companies and different industries. And so when I left, and the first role that I had for almost 18 years was in commercial real estate, I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be involved in the technology world, and that is a difficult transition for some people to achieve by moving from one industry where you're actually quite well known to another industry. but through a very consistent process of uh, seeking out people in my network and expanding my network to include people who were in the industry in which I wanted to move to. I was able to find those opportunities and to grow into that different industry. And the first industry that I grew into was technology, and applying the leadership skills and the capabilities that I had developed in real estate to the technology industry was very successful. And the skills and capabilities involved a lot of consistency, understanding clearly what needed to be done, followed by consistent and reliable actions. And whilst we always think that these things are fairly simple and straightforward, the actual act of doing things consistently is powerful in and of itself. And one of the first companies that I went to was trying to develop itself to be an organization that could be taken over by a much larger organization. And by developing these consistent processes and procedures and putting them in place in the organization and documenting them, the value of the
Mhm.
organization to the potential purchaser was much higher than it would have been otherwise. And so there's just one example of how the consistency effect can positively influence an outcome.
But what I loved the most is you transitioned, you learned from your setback, and you also transitioned into an industry, but with um, an intention to have different set of skills, because real estate, when we picturize about real estate, it's all about sales and revenue, but you also got into the technology aspect of it, and that's something, especially uh, young workforce, young people can learn when they are trying to set their footsteps into the workforce. And Brad, in today's volatile world, since you mentioned about transitioning into real estate and then technology as well, now we have artificial intelligence, we have economic uncertainty, we have socio-political changes. We have changing workforces. We saw pandemic. Do you believe consistency still holds up as the dominant, that X factor or the success factor, or does it need to evolve with the times?
I think it needs to evolve, but the core principle is still important. And you brought up, Santa, you brought up I think an incredibly important point, which is that um, the companies and the industries that were
Mm.
typically considered to be safe havens for jobs. So whether it was high tech, technology, finance, all of these industries are being shaken by global factors. And AI is certainly one of those global factors that's affecting it. So the jobs that used to be either entry level jobs or mid level jobs or even executive roles are being changed fundamentally by these factors. And part of what it says to leaders or even aspiring leaders is that you need to make sure that your identity is rock solid and that it isn't tied inextricably to your job role. You are not your job title. You are not your business card. And you need to make sure that your social network, your business and professional network, and your coaching and learning capabilities are outside of the company that you work for. Because when your role is in your identity is so tightly tied to an individual role in a company that can disappear overnight, it doesn't just shake. your financial situation. It shakes your identity unless you have built up this resilient personality that can withstand those job traditions. And this is a part, actually, it's a number of different parts that are explored in the book about how to build a network that is beyond your company, how to seek out and create mentorship relationships that are going to help you beyond your existing role, and how to go about transitioning from one organization to another, and particularly from transitioning from one industry to another.
Wow. This I personally realized this 3 4 years back, um, when we were hit by a pandemic. During pandemic, I was safe, and I kind of had I was in a very safe, zone, that believing that my role is something which may not be hit by this sudden change in the entire world. But after pandemic, post pandemic, the entire world shifted. That was such a paradigm shift, and I was affected by it, and that kind of made me realize that I was in such a wrong headspace of thinking that my entire identity is attached to the company I'm working in, the role I'm performing, the job role I'm into. I'm so much more than this, and this is the best time I should work on that. I should explore. So that's such a golden takeaway for all the listeners, irrespective of their age, their gender, their role, or their location as well, or the industry. So thank you for sharing that, Brad.
And just building on your comments and your experience, is that the consistency effect speaks to the fact that you should be building that identity, and the component parts of that identity include your network, your mentors, your social group, your connections to the community beyond your role. That's something that you should be doing on a consistent basis, because you don't want to just rely on those things when you're transitioning jobs, because by that time it's either too late or it's going to take you a lot of time to develop those things. You need to look at them like a garden, and a garden needs consistent care and attention in order for it to bear fruit or flowers, whichever you want, over a period of time. So a part of what I talk about in the book is that your network is something that you need to build and to nurture over time. Your mentors need to be people that are outside of your company, because if you leave your company, you don't want to have to leave that mentorship. And your connections to the community, your connections in social circles, need to include a more robust group than the people that you work with on a day to day basis.
Right, right. Great, Brad, and a bit of not exactly it's a contradiction, but just to make it more and more profound level of discussion. Some here would argue that um, the likes of the startups, which have now become global giants, they were built precisely. I mean, these disruptors in their respective industries, they were built precisely because leaders took massive swings, massive bets, not because they played small, consistent games. So, isn't there still a place where grand slams are the only way forward?
So I think it's a very important part of the conversation, because the media would certainly have you believe that the most successful people are the ones who took all of those major risks. And
Mhm.
and in some respects that's true. But if you look at pick any of the names, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, any known and very popular people that would be the kind of people that you would think hit grand slam home runs. If you look behind what happened to them, there is a whole series of consistent efforts and a lot of disappointments along the way that went to that contributing to that overnight success. And the thing that many people who are credited as having overnight success will tell you is that, yes, it took me 10 years or 20 years to be recognized as an overnight success. People don't see all of the energy and effort that's below the iceberg. And so if if you're just chasing those grand slam home runs, you're putting a lot of energy and risk into one particular basket. Whereas if you consider it like a baseball game where you step up to the plate, and if conditions are favorable, you take that big swing for the grand slam home run. But if conditions are not favorable, um, swinging for a grand slam home run is an incredible use of energy that could be better used on consistent efforts that yield singles and doubles to carry on the baseball metaphor, and eventually singles and doubles win more baseball games, more
Mm.
winning seasons, and build more professional careers than grand slam home runs.
Yep. That's really a brilliant way to answer that, Brad. So before we wrap up, if our listeners they would like to get a hold of your book and also connect with you, what will be the best way?
So the book should be out probably in August of 2025. And if anyone is interested in getting on the advanced preview list, they can go to www.consistency-edge.com and join my mailing list. And I will be more than thrilled to give them access to early copies before they're generally available.
Well, I'll be sure to have all the links added into the show notes for our listeners. And Brad, this has been such an eye-opening one, um, because in a world which is obsessed with speed and viral success, your message, your book, it brings us back to the power of showing up, doing the work, and building something truly lasting, which I absolutely stand with. So thank you so much. This was such a great conversation.
All right, Santa. Thank you so much for having me.
So to all the listeners out there, Brad's book, The Consistency Effect, will be out probably in the August of 2025. Um, uh, I hope it's 2025, right, Brad? Or 26?
At 25, yes.
Hmm.
About
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll make sure to have all the links in there. But I highly recommend all of you to dive in and start rethinking how you measure success in your own business. And to get a hold of Brad's book, just refer to the show notes. And until next time, this is BizBlend, where we blend wisdom with action. And I'm your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.